Hello, this is Cho of the Shiny Colors Discord. Welcome to another episode of the Shiny Review. Today we've got two new cards to talk about as part of Parallel Collection. We have the new cards for Kogane as well as Tenka. Keep in mind these cards are technically limited. Parallel Collection only comes around every so often, and they'll be on future banners that are Parallel Collection related, but at a much lower rate than they are now. So if you want to ideally spark for these cards, now is only your time to do so. Starting things off, we have Kogane. Round 4 of Paracole brings to us a softer future with Kogane, who has seemingly repaired her family situation established long ago. She's a pure dance unit with a mixture of self-mental reduction, interest reduction, and damage reduction. She pairs this up with a small bit of attention up on one of her passives, and otherwise focuses on maintaining a certain amount of HP to remain in the ideal range for her final passive. Kogane is in an interesting position, given how Dance Antika constantly teeters on the edge of viability, thanks in part to a lot of legacy carrying them. The main issue generally stemmed from the fact it was hard to outright replace somebody like MSC Kogane as of recent, who gave the team much-needed duet. They still have that answer, sort of, but the consistency goes down with the less members that you have that can utilize it. There have been some experimentations with PC Kogane, and that feels fairly viable to run. If nothing else for her charge appeal, which means that the memory appeal for Dance Antika is going to be that much stronger. And for those that only really care about the story, it's a very touching storyline to follow up on, which realistically has been something they've been building up since 2018. Her roles are center, buffer, attention up, interest manipulation, and mental reduction, and I moderately to highly recommend pulling for this Kogane. Kogane's initial appeal is a Dance 4.0 that reduces your current mental by 30% and grants a Dance maximum 160% buff, dependent on how much mental you lose. As long as this exceeds, I believe, 1000, then you'll reach the 160% cap. This lasts for 4 turns. Her plus appeal, which requires the full Antika lineup and for your mental to be below 89%, grants a 90% interest down on one judge for 1 turn, and a mental damage 50% cut on yourself for 3 turns, so you'll take half damage for the next 3 turns. Her 4-star appeal is a Dance 5.0 that reduces your current mental by 30%, raises your dance by a maximum of 200% based on the mental reduced from your appeal for 4 turns, and the plus appeal is the same effect. As long as you have Antika, or rather the full Antika lineup, and below 89% mental, you'll reduce a judge's interest by 90% for 1 turn, and apply a mental damage cut of 50% on yourself for 3 turns. For her passives, at 1 star, she gets a Dance 60% up if it's turned to her earlier and has a 35% chance to activate once. Her 2-star passive is a Dance 120% up and Attention 100% up if you have the full Antika lineup. It has a 40% chance to activate once, and comes with a Dance plus 100 uncap. Her 3-star uncap is a Dance plus 100. Her 4-star uncap is a Dance plus 150, leaving her a total of 450 Dance to unlock, and this also gets her her Rainbow passive at 4 stars. Said Rainbow passive is a Dance 300% up if your current mental is between 35% and 64%. This has a 30% chance to activate up to 3 times, but is limited to once per turn. Her memory appeal, when maxed out, is a Dance 2.5 that fortifies all Dance actives, including Dance Down, interestingly enough, and links into a Dance 3.5 that fortifies all Dance effects. Her charge appeal, when maxed out, is a Dance 2.5, scaling based on both the level of the skill, but also the number of copies you've gotten for Kogane. We talked about how charge appeal works in previous reviews, but the short and sweet is the levels are simultaneously locked between your memory level and the number of copies you've merged onto. Kogane's charge is the same as previous units, meaning she'll be a great complement to Dance Antika specifically, whether or not she's actually the center. Now, just like Twilight's collection, Parallel Collection does not have a Hazuki system from the get-go, meaning that any dupes you get will either be really expensive or really rare. Kogane, generally speaking, feels like a real hero at 2 stars, but pulling for extra copies to buff up the charge appeal or access her 4-star passive to beef up the team further is, certainly worth doing as well, especially given that the passive is a relatively easy condition when you consider many of the other pieces that you're running on the team. It really makes you wonder why someone like Kaho had the same effect, a Dance 300% up, but had a much harder condition to activate comparatively. That aside, you really can't go wrong with any number of copies, so pull how you feel best on it. For the support recommendations, Twaikole Yuika stands at the top, but we also have a lot of other pieces that may seem odd or understandable. Alstroemeria continues to have good options for general dance builds, but thankfully we can slide in cards like TC Yuika and the limited Mamimi in order to flesh out more of a proper Antika build. A notable inclusion since the last time we looked at dance is the Summer 2024 campaign Toru, whose 2-star passive provides memory gauge for any team running 2 or less different units, which is something a pure Antika team can certainly abuse to their benefit. Madoka acts as an additional bridge for the team with some small attention up to take damage, and overall, the support setup is solid and should remain similar enough unless a big shakeup happens in any upcoming banners. For some synergy suggestions, the first one I would consider is Yuika 10. She's the bread and butter to Dance Antika currently, providing duet and otherwise any form of consistency for the team at hand. Cutting your mental prior to using her appeals will also give you access to her double duet, which can help immensely at getting to your memory appeal faster. Kiriko 10 is a safe opener for Dance Antika, granting interest ignore for the turn, buffs your dance, which can then be fortified by Kogane's memory appeal, and even provides an immediate mental reduction when you're above 80% mental, which helps set up for Yuika and for Kogane if you have her at 4 stars. Sakuya 7 is the last of the recommendations here and is the lone AoE unit that leaves an impact, which by default leaves her in the dance position. She also reduces your mental by 20 to 25% depending on which appeal you use, and provides further dance buffs for Kogane's memory. Now for the grades. Kogane as a center I think is anywhere from an S+ to SS, but probably leans more towards S+. Having a potential dance 8.5 on your own is reasonably strong, given that there's no conditions behind it outside of the number of copies you pulled for the sake of your charge. The real advantage is taking the maximum 200% dance buff and fortifying it with 2 parts of your memory, leading to absurd follow-up damage if the memory appeal can't seal the deal. She has really high potential for setting up for some really cool AoE plays after using your memory, so there is some level of flexibility that you don't necessarily see, since a lot of times fortifiers don't necessarily have good buffs on their own, whereas here, having an upwards of 200% buff that gets doubled and then doubled again, things can go kind of crazy really fast. As a unit, Kogane I think is anywhere from an A to an S-. She's not crazy broken, mostly because of her being single target, but I do think that she is very solid right now. She's a little trickier to grade given that she has a lot of check marks given to her, but it's hard to say if all of these add up to make her a broken card, as mentioned earlier. She has solid uptime on her dance buffs, an interesting plus effect to stall out judges temporarily, and helps herself to staying in the ideal range thanks to damage cut. She really is just missing some memory gauge boosting to feel like a truly complete package for Dance Antika, but realistically there's still a lot of good stuff here, and I imagine that we have not seen the last of Dance Antika support in 2024. So next then we have Tenka, who somehow is already wrapping up their end of the parallel collection for Alstroemeria. Tenka arrives as a pure visual unit with a lot to potentially live up to. Visual Alstroemeria has been on a roller coaster since 2020 realistically, of either being extremely strong or extremely whatever, generally off the back of how good Tenka is in the current best environment. Right now, Visual Alstroemeria is extremely unpopular, but still sees really niche play from hyper-dedicated support. Right now, Visual Alstroemeria has been in a pretty bad spot with low representation, but high placements from those that do attempt to make that happen. Mostly just out of purely dedicated producers who are trying to make the team still work. Now, as for what this Tenka does, she's a single target focused unit with the ability to reverse a judge's interest. She grants small visual buffs and can apply mulligans or play defensively if she's able to link appeal. Tenka is not really the answer that Visual Alstroemeria needed, but she does attempt to kind of address some key issues with the team. Her big payoff passive only requires 5 healing instances instead of 8 to 10 like the last few cards, because this Tenka barely helps at all with healing. She's a little more defensive at the cost of really only being an interest reverse spot outside of the center position. The visual buff on her feels kind of unnecessary, especially given how low value it is, and maybe either needed some level of healing or passive activation up, in my opinion. Her roles are center, buffer, interest manipulation, and can mulligan, and I moderately recommend pulling for this Tenka. Tenka's initial appeal is a visual 4.0 that reverses the judge's interest for 1 turn, grants a 15% visual buff for 4 turns, and gives you +1 mulligan. Her link appeal raises the judge's interest by 50% for 2 turns. Her 4-star version is a visual 5.0 that reverses the judge's interest for 1 turn, grants a 30% visual buff for 4 turns, and +1 mulligan. and links into a judge interest 50% up for 2 turns. So the whole point is that you use this appeal when it's linked, so that way the 50% up becomes 50% down, then on the follow-up turn, it's up by 50% instead of down, so you do more damage. Her 1-star passive is a visual 60% up if it's turned to her earlier, and it has a 35% chance to activate once. Her 2-star passive is a visual 100% up and mental 1% heal if you have the full Austromeria lineup and it's turned to her later. This has a 30% chance to activate twice and comes with a visual +100 uncap. Her 3-star uncap is a visual +100. Her 4-star uncap is a visual +150, totaling up to +450 visual, alongside her rainbow passive. Said rainbow passive is a visual 150% up if you have 5 or more healing instances and you are running the full Austromeria lineup. This has a 30% chance to activate 3 times and is limited to once per turn. Her memory appeal, when maxed out, is a visual 3.0 that links into a visual maximum 3.5 that scales based on how high your current mental is, and she has the same levels of every other charge appeal just for visual. Tenka's memory appeal is fairly easy to use and has no particular downside to it. You'll ideally want to supplement her with plenty of healing to keep high damage consistent, which has been Visual Austro's problem for a little bit. Tenka herself lacking healing makes this a bit of an issue, but I imagine this will be patched up in no time flat if they're interested in keeping this team afloat. 2-star is a pretty safe place to stop with this Tenka, just like we were saying with Kogane, because of the charge appeal bonuses, but it also gives you her relatively good 2-star passive and a relatively safe amount of buffs through her initial appeal. And it gives you that 1.5 charge for either herself as the center or your other Austromeria members if need be. Generally speaking, it seems like more people are comfortable with having this Tenka be your center, which is entirely understandable. For the support recommendation, we have, of course, Twaikole Amana, but we also have the duo of Visual Shis alongside cards like Visual Hokura. This visual setup depends a lot on utilizing synergies between Shis and Austro to full success from it. Hokura also have very reasonable inclusions for a more general visual build, thanks in part to their easy-to-access masteries for smooth team building. Now, Permanent Chiyuki is over here on the right, and it's not because she's overtly strong, but because she's really the only usable visual Chiyuki since 2021, since the last card she got was the event SSR this year, which is not very good. This has led people to kind of believe that Chiyuki will get a limited visual support sometime in the near future to complement the team, so it may be wise to wait and see if that support does in fact appear before committing to the build. Perhaps you're sitting on a couple Hazuki and you may want to wait to see if that Chiyuki pops up, since you don't exactly need a new Amana. If you just want some okay masteries next to Amana, then this Chiyuki will do fine enough. For some synergy suggestions, we have Amana 12, her latest produced SSR, which has access to passive activation rate up alongside the ability to bolster the memory gauge, making Tenka's charge appeal more accessible. She lacks healing, for the most part, but attempts to make up for that with these buffs. Now speaking of healing, we have Chiyuki 9, her Twaikole card. She's the main damage dealer you want to have for the setup thanks to her AoE, but also because of her access to healing through her appeals and passives, which are extremely important for the build, and something that Visual Austro desperately needs in order to function. Overall, Tenka earns an S+ as a center. It's generally very strong, it's not super overtuned, nor does it have a ramp up to it to make it even scarier. While this memory appeal can technically suffer in certain Fest conditions compared to others, as they've sometimes introduced the Fest gimmick where players take more damage than normal, it's still something that Austromeria can relatively use well thanks in part to healing here and there. As a unit, Tenka earns an A. I feel that Tenka is a strong unit who is doing her best to exist in a team that has had a lot of trouble lately. She doesn't fix a lot of problems that Visual Austromeria have had, and instead presents small band-aids that make this a little bit easier but still feels kind of incomplete. Overall, I think that she is still a very solid card and is worth picking up for Visual Austromeria, but she's going to have to do a lot of heavy lifting at the center, even with some of the best stuff you can afford. So, that will do it for the video today. Thank you so much, as always, for watching. Next time we'll be talking about whatever banner comes next, which we actually do know this time, thanks to the power of being a little late on this recording. The upcoming banner is going to be a limited Toru alongside limited Luca as the support. So, produce Toru, support Luca. I'm a little scared as to what in the world that's going to mean for players, but we're just going to have to hold out and see in just a couple days. So, till then, I've been Cho, thank you again for watching, have a wonderful rest of your day.